Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to change the world one starfish or one person at a time. I'm really excited for our guest today, but as always, guys, make sure to rate, review, subscribe. That's how we get the word out. I know you'll want to share today's episode. We had a brief talk before. This is my first time meeting this amazing lady, but I'm excited to see where this goes. Claire Chandler has been running her business for 10 years. She's been in the leadership HR department for like 30 years. But it calls herself a leadership therapist, which I think is a great term. We all need therapists as leaders, so that sounds like a great place to be out on the East Coast. So really excited to get into things. Thanks so much for being here, Claire.
Oh, thank you so much, Angela. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's dig into some stuff fast. So you're a leadership therapist. What got you into that? And where do you see it? Where do you see it going? And how do you see it impacting, lives?
Yeah, I love that. So as we were talking about right before we hopped on this recording, I was in corporate America for the first, bulk of my career. I consider myself a corporate survivor and a cancer survivor.
Cool.
And people kind of look at me sideways like, really? But, if you've been in corporate, you kind of get it. A lot of entrepreneurs that I talk to and work with have that sort of, corporate escape story. My time in corporate was wonderful. I would not have traded it. It created for me a great kind of baseline and some foundational skills and structure and best practices and all of that. But I was diagnosed with cancer in 2011, and it really forced me to acknowledge that the track that I was on, the executive track that I was moving toward and being groomed toward, really wasn't feeling very fulfilling. And it was not in alignment with how I felt I wanted to spend my time and my life and my waking hours and my energy. I'm sure people in your audience can relate. Like the closer I got to the office after a while, the more my stomach started to churn.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good way to live. And I know so many people who are like that. And so I got healthy in 2011. Came back to work after a leave of absence, gave notice, and everyone was like, what are you going to do now? And I'm like, I really don't know.
But I'm not doing this.
I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have clients lined up. I didn't form my company for another 2 years. So I took like 2 years just to be open to what the universe was going to reveal to me as my life's work. And I know that sounds a little bit woo-woo, and I'm not typically a woo-woo person. But it kind of works for me, right? Like if you speak it out into the universe and you say, I don't know what path I'm supposed to be on, but I'm not going to close doors to it, right? I'm just going to kind of walk the earth a little bit, serve who I serve, spend as much time with people who I enjoy spending time with, and trying to serve them in an impactful way.
That's so good. I like that. So you talked a lot about, before we chat a little bit about, like, one of the things you really want to help leaders, with is clarity and purpose and culture and like that kind of stuff. I'm going to dive into a little bit of that. I mean, how did you find, it took you a couple of years. What got you deciding that this was your purpose? And, how was the starting journey, especially?
Oh, love that question. And it's so important, right? Because hindsight is 2020, and there are so many things that I wouldn't have done differently necessarily, but I would have innovated and pivoted faster. One of the things I certainly took too long to do was to invest in coaches and business mentors in those early years to help act as a sounding board and a little bit of a leadership therapist to me, so I could find my way faster and with greater clarity. In those early years, I was doing, when I came out of corporate, one of my last roles was as vice president of talent and career development. And it was wonderful because I found that this introverted person who used to be scared to death to speak in public, that became my adrenaline rush. Being on stages, speaking in front of large groups of employees, it was something that really revved my engine. And so in those early years as an outside solopreneur, I was doing workshops and webinars and conferences, speaking to the average everyday employee about how to reignite their passion for their work, right? How to realign with why they got into the field they were in the first place, what lights them up, and really enable and embolden them to go back into their typically corporate job and have a better conversation with their boss about how they wanted to better align with, their job with their passion. And what ended up happening was those workshops were wonderful. And people came up to me afterwards, like, I found that spark again. I'm so happy that I, went to your training or whatever. But the problem was I was sending them back into a corporate environment where the leaders they were reporting to were not as enlightened.
Right.
And so what ended up happening was I rekindled their fire, and then their boss kind of snuffed it out, like, the closing scene of like Survivor, right? And so like, the epiphany I had, which formed my first real big transformational pivot as a business owner and practitioner, was to say, I have to start as high up in an organization as I possibly can. Because if I don't convert the leaders to a better way of leading, then it doesn't matter how much we inspire or motivate or mobilize the employees underneath them. If they're continuing to follow the same toxic leaders or just clueless leaders, it's not going to make a difference. And so that's how I sort of got into this specialty of working with leaders, especially executive leaders, on leading in more natural, authentic, followable ways.
Wow, it's so good. I just got out of a trip with John Maxwell, and that's the thing he said too, is just really starting at the top is really key. So it's kind of funny. I hear that twice in like 2 weeks. So must be something to it. It's a sign. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, oh, this is a sign for me. I don't know if anyone's listening. It's a sign. It's a sign for me. So what are some things that you think, leaders need to do differently or better, or, what do you see as the biggest downfall within the leadership circle?
Yeah, I think a lot of leaders who don't get it yet lack two really important things. One, they lack self-awareness. I think too often leaders, especially executive leaders, ascend to that level and then sort of forget their humble beginnings. And I've heard too many, I'm going to use air quotes, leaders who have said, I got to where I am without any sort of development or coaching.
Right. Self-made.
And it's worked fine. Yeah. Like, and it's worked fine for me. It's like, but have you noticed the trail of bodies behind you? Right. And so one of the things that I work on with leaders individually before I then get them into a room to get them to work together more effectively is really turn that light on and show them a little bit of a mirror to say, this is who you truly are, right? And I don't mean in terms of this is what you're doing wrong, but this is what tick, right? This is your DNA. This is what comes naturally to you. This is what motivates you. And let's get you super hyper aware of your natural talents and your motivators so that the second piece that is missing, especially in executive leaders, is authenticity, right? So let's get you really, really aware of who you truly are, what really drives you. And then let's put you in a position where you can be more genuine and more true to that. Because I think one of the mistakes a lot of leaders make, and leaders say this to me all the time when I'm coaching them or advising them or being their leadership therapist, they say, I'm just not charismatic. I'm just not that guy or that gal who can stand up in front of a town hall of employees and be inspiring. And I always challenge them and say, you can be inspiring. And the way to do that is to be more authentic to who you truly are. The worst thing you can do, and I have seen this happen, and it's a disaster, is leaders see charismatic leaders and they say, that's what I need to emulate. And emulating or admiring is one thing. Trying to duplicate something that is not natural to you will fall flat every single time. I've seen it fall so disastrously flat. And to me, there are some people with a natural charisma, with a natural ability to tell stories, to be at least seemingly authentic, right? And the worst thing you can do as a leader is try to emulate something you're not. Step into what you are naturally, what your natural state of flow is, what your natural style is, and be true to that. And then you're going to get people to follow you, because that's what they're looking for. People are looking for a connection with people who are real, not people who pretend to be something they're not.
That's so true. I love that. So if you're a leader, here's something that I see a lot of leaders, I guess, struggle with or work through. And, you want to help your people succeed, or you want to help your people win. They just don't, I don't know how to put it, don't want it the same way, but they say they do. Their actions say otherwise. How do you, as a leader, deal with loving people where they're at and pushing them without over pushing them?
Yeah. I love that phrase. I hadn't heard that before. Loving people where they're at. I typically express it as meeting people where they are, right? But I love the way that you've expressed it. I think that's so on target, because I do think we have to love the people we're spending time with. Right? We have to deeply care about the teams we're building, the businesses we're growing, but even more fundamentally, the path we're on, the purpose we're pursuing, right? And so every single business has the entire spectrum of employees, people who walk in day one, completely mesh with your culture, fire on all cylinders, and are absolute A players. Those are almost the unicorns, right? Because they're not typically going to walk in, plug and play, even though every leader wants that. It doesn't typically exist. It is extremely rare. So you are better off meeting people where they are individually, understanding, just like I said about leaders, like getting that self-awareness, but understanding what drives them individually and what strengths they bring to the table, and then remove the obstacles that exist that you're imposing as a leader, whether you know it or not, whether you intend it or not, between what comes naturally to them, what they believe in, and how it's going to contribute to the shared mission. But you have to be clear about what that shared mission is.
So what are some things that you see that leaders can do to help them, go through that? Like, I mean, obviously having a therapist, that sounds like a great idea. Outside of that, I can see why that would be so good. But outside of that, what are some things that you think, leaders can do to meet people where they're at?
Yeah. And let's definitely come back to this concept of therapy, because it's not what people might think, right? I am not a licensed therapist. It's more of a term that I use. I think one of the things that leaders need to do is be not just crystal clear about the purpose of the organization, right? Some call it a mission, some call it the path that we're on. Some call it their why. Every single leader has to be crystal clear about why we're on this journey, why this business exists, what we are here to accomplish. But beyond that, they also have to be bought in, right? They have to be committed to it, not because their communications department gave them a script and talking points, but because they truly believe this mission is going to be impactful in some way, big or small. The clearer they are and the more committed they truly, naturally, authentically are, the easier it will be to convert others to follow them in ways and in paths that are unique to them. And I think that's the part that leaders struggle with the most. They focus so much on this employee isn't performing, or this employee isn't behaving, or this employee just doesn't get it. And I have conversation after conversation with leaders where they go, I guess I have to have another another meeting with them and really walk them through in excruciating detail again, all the things I want them to do. And I always say to them, spend less time on that, because that's how micromanagement is formed, right? Because I'm just going to go back over the same steps over and over and over. There's a reason they're not getting it. And it may not be lack of skill. It may be lack of will, because they just don't get the why. And if you spent an additional 5 to 10 seconds explaining to an employee the why behind what you're asking of them as an individual, of us as a team, and then, more globally as an organization, most of them will start to get it. Not everybody, but the clearer you are about your purpose and your mission and the journey and what it's going to take to get there from a performance and a behavior standpoint, the more easily you're going to be able to course correct. You're going to be able to nudge people who are starting to go off the rails onto the right path. And you're going to, see much more clearly who isn't actually the right fit.
Mm. And saying that, so let's go back to the therapist thing. What is the therapist to you? Why are you called a therapist?
Yeah. So, I have, and I know entrepreneurs struggle with this all the time. What do we call ourselves, right? Are we an advisor? Are we a consultant? Are we a specialist? Are we a strategist? And what's interesting is over the years, as I speak with executive leaders, especially one-on-one, they get to a point where, my most favorite clients, the ones that I really click with, they are the ones who will call me on their drive home from work, right? Not a scheduled meeting, not a structured Zoom call, but just, they're going to just call me because when they get away from the office or away from the job site, they need a place to unpack what they're feeling. And some people hear that and go, well, their executives are not really supposed to feel stuff. And it's like, well, that's unfair, right? Because we criticize executives for not being human enough and not being vulnerable enough, but we don't give them the space to do that. And so executives go through the same struggle that, every other employee does about how do I find my most authentic path that's going to fulfill me, but also help me contribute in the best ways possible through my role, my job role. So I have these conversations with leaders all the time, and invariably they will say, why does this always feel like a therapy session? And it's like, well, that's good. That's a compliment to me, right? Because it means that they got to a place where they could be completely real, completely vulnerable. I'm somebody who is not in their shoes, but I've been where they are. I've been in leadership roles. I've been within big corporate. I've been a people leader. I am a business owner. I get the struggles and the frustrations of not just trying to run and grow a business, but also mobilize and motivate the right people along the way, which is always the most challenging part, right? I say to leaders all the time, if you were employing robots, this would be a lot easier, right? But you're not. You're employing humans with very real feelings and very real flaws. Mm-hmm. And so we have to find ways to connect with them. But part of my leadership therapy is to create that space for even executive leaders to be able to get real, to get vulnerable, to be authentic with someone who can reflect back to them and who can get it, so that they can go back into their organization and lead in those ways, in more vulnerable and in more authentic ways, because that's what people want to follow.
I love that. So, you built your business. Can you scroll back 10 years or wherever it was? When was one of the biggest challenges you've had in building your business? Was there a point in it that you actually were like, hey man, I'm out? Or did you ever have those moments of wanting to quit? And if you did, how did you get through it?
You're not going to want this answer, but I honestly have never considered going back to work for somebody else. I thought I might. Those early days, I left corporate in 2011. I didn't form my company until 2013. And I didn't, I think we said this before we started recording. I didn't really have a plan. I didn't really know what I was going to specialize in, but I did know that in the worst case scenario, I was going to fall flat on my face and then just go get another job. I mean, I had marketable skills. I could figure out how to re-employ myself. And that moment never happened. Are there moments where I have doubted or questioned my own value, my own ability, my own, worth as a business advisor and leadership therapist? Absolutely. I would be fooling you and fooling myself if I said otherwise, right? That imposter syndrome or that fraud complex is a lot more manageable now. Those early days, I would catch myself walking into the offices of a new client, and literally in the space of closing my car door and then walking into their offices, there was that voice in my ear going, "Is today the day? Is today the day they're going to find out that I'm not really as good as I have purported myself to be?" Right? Is this the day that I'm going to be called out as a fraud? And I know most, if not all, entrepreneurs have been there and are probably listening to this and going, that's me sitting here right now. And that's probably been the biggest obstacle is to overcome that, not gloss it over. Mm-hmm. Because again, I think the worst thing you can do is pretend that doesn't exist, right? Or counter that with, well, I'm just going to walk in more puffed up with a lot of bravado and then hope nobody calls me out on it because they're too intimidated to say anything. Well, that's not a solution, right? Right. In fact, we have come to embrace, I think, over these 10 years, and Brene Brown has done brilliant work around the power of vulnerability. 10 years ago, that phrase, the power of vulnerability, was an oxymoron. Like, that didn't make any sense. And now we understand that it's critical for leaders to not fake vulnerability, but truly demonstrate genuine vulnerability, not fall apart in front of their employees. No. But remind everybody they're human too. Right. And that was one of the ways that I sort of overcame or got to a place of being able to manage very effectively, I think, most days, that imposter syndrome, right? And it's not about out hustling and outworking everybody else. Of course, this is hard work, right? But it's really more about me showing up as a human, me showing up relationship first, me showing up serving, not selling, not trying to please my clients, but truly being the person that's going to help them move the needle, gel better, strengthen their culture from the inside out, and get their leaders to work together more effectively. And when I do that in ways that are genuine to me, first of all, I'm practicing what I'm preaching. And second of all, it's a lot easier to show up because it's truly authentically me.
So what are some tips? Because I love this. It's self-belief. And I know a lot of people struggle with that at different times, of course. You said one of the things you mentioned was, showing up as a relationship, not there to sell, that kind of concept. What are some tips that you would give someone that is just starting out and, they are struggling with that belief? They're struggling with all the ups and downs of, it might even be 3, 4, 5 years in, but they're really struggling with that. Like, man, is this for me? Am I really enough? Like, all of that. What are some tangible tips you would give someone else that could help them possibly work through that faster?
Yeah. The first one is what I literally say to every single executive, middle manager, and individual contributor. And it's the sheer fact that you are not alone in feeling the way that you feel. And when you hear that as a person, that you are not alone in feeling the way you feel, and the sheer fact that even executive leaders, CEOs, need to hear that now and then, it's so reaffirming, because I think one of the things that this global pandemic taught us and other things have taught us is humans crave connection, and more we crave community, right? And it doesn't mean we're all social, like party animals, but it does mean that we need to feel a connection. So I think the very first step for everybody is to understand whatever level of self-belief you are at in this moment is not always going to be this level now. Sometimes it's going to go up, sometimes it's going to ratchet down, but do know that you are not alone in doubting your own abilities. So that's kind of point one, and that's universally applicable. I think the second thing, especially for entrepreneurs, especially for people starting out, or even 5 years in, or a few years in, sort of re-examining, is this the right path for me? Is it time for another pivot? It's never a bad idea to evaluate whether you should pivot, right? It's about evolution, not blowing everything up and starting over necessarily for everybody. But it's also, like I was talking about with leaders, really getting self-aware about what your natural abilities are and which ones, become kind of your fast lanes, because you can build a business doing just about anything. And us solopreneurs, when we first start out, convince ourselves we have to do everything, right? We have to wear every hat. When I show up in front of a client, I'm both the leadership therapist. I'm also the accountant. I'm also the business developer. I'm also the personnel department. Like I'm all of those things for my business. And it took me a while to sort of put those other hats, leave them in the car so I can just fully serve and be fully present. But you have to understand what your fast lanes are, because not everything is going to come naturally to you. You might have a natural ability to empathize with your client or your customer. You might have a natural ability to solve their problems and fix what's broken. You might have a natural ability to think at a very high strategic level. But you may not be able to do all of those things simultaneously, right? So that's kind of that next step, is to really truly understand what your natural gifts and talents and strengths are. And then the other piece is, like I was saying with my work with leaders, understanding what uniquely motivates you. Because I think too often, especially when we forget that we're not alone, we do spend a lot of time in our own heads, especially entrepreneurs, because no one else is going to get this, right? And it can be draining. I mean, it's hard to just grow a business out of thin air. It is hard to be all things, in your business. And so you need to also understand what it is that refills you and re-energizes you. Because as a good friend of mine always reminds me, you can't fill from an empty cup. So if you're constantly drained in your business, in your family, in your life, you're not showing up as your best self. And when you're drained, your business, your ability to execute reflects that. And that's what chips away again at your self-belief. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? So it's that self-belief, understanding you're not alone in feeling that way. It's that self-awareness of, really figuring out what comes naturally to you and really sort of focus your energy on that. And then, kind of filling your blind spots or your those other areas with other people. And then what motivates you, and find ways to refill your cup.
Those are so good. I love that. Very cool. So what are some ways that a team leader can help their team go faster through, into the growth? What are some tips that you have as far as being able to, bring the team together and have more growth, which is what everyone wants?
Yeah, such a great, powerful question, because now that we are through the bulk of the global pandemic, and I just keep saying it that way because I don't know that it's ever truly going to be behind us, but whatever. Every company has this sort of reinvigorated sense of urgency. Look at all the time we lost, all the momentum we lost. We've got to get back. We've got to grow. And so a lot of clients will call me and say, can you come in and help us, facilitate a strategic plan? Or we already know where we want to be in 5 years. Can you help facilitate the roadmap to get there? And my answer is always the same. I'm happy to do that as a day 2 workshop. But day 1, we have to work on establishing and strengthening the connection in your team. And so it's a little bit of context to answer your question of, leaders who want to do this who want to grow faster have to accelerate the trust within their team first. If your team, especially the leaders, do not trust each other, are not real with each other, and are not showing up from a place of authenticity and vulnerability, but also candor, in ways where they don't feel threatened by speaking their minds. If they don't trust each other and do all of those things, it doesn't matter how brilliant your growth strategy is, you're not going to achieve it. You're not going to achieve it. So for leaders and organizations of any size, even if you're a startup, even if you're a small company, it's even more important, right? Because the ripple effects of a bad hire, a bad team, a bad quarter are far bigger in a smaller company than in a bigger one. Because a bigger one is sort of set up to absorb some of the losses, the bad decisions, the bad hires. Small company doesn't have that luxury. No, startup doesn't have that luxury. So absolutely, those who are looking to accelerate their growth, don't pass go before you build up the trust within your team.
What are some ways that you can build the trust within the team?
Certainly for me, so one of the things that I typically will do is I will meet individually with each of the leaders, and organizations can do this on their own. They don't even need to do it. But to meet one-on-one with each leader or each member of that team, to get a little bit more real, right? And to sort of work a little bit more on that self-awareness. I happen to use in my work a suite of diagnostic tools that kind of help inform that conversation. Gives me a little bit more measurable data to sort of hold up that mirror and say, here's what makes you tick. Here's the DNA. Here's what comes naturally to you. Here's what motivates you, et cetera. That is always hugely helpful, but you don't have to wait for that. You can have these one-on-ones to sort of understand, what puts you in the zone. What are the things that you really enjoy doing, as part of your job? Where are you struggling, right? What are some of the obstacles? Having that one-on-one before getting people together as a group is really important because it kind of warms up the audience, so to speak. And it warms people up to this type of a conversation so that they can walk in a little bit more self-aware and a little bit more in tune with what's important to them. Because if you blow past and anyone will tell you this, when you're doing like persuasive speaking, you have to answer the with them, right? You have to answer the what's in it for me. You also have to do that when you're leading. You have to make a connection on an individual level, again, meeting people where they are, about what's most important to them. What do they value? What do they fear? What do they, what makes them lean in versus what makes them mentally leave a conversation, and understanding that. So that's kind of one tangible thing. And then once you get them into a room, don't just do a mashup where you say, okay, now that I met with each of you one-on-one, let's work on the strategy. No, you just blew it, right? Because you skipped that step of let's talk as humans first. And some people hearing that go, what a time waster. Like there's so much we've got to do first. If you skip that, right? It's like, did you not hear the part where it's really, really urgent? We're out of COVID. We've got to grow. If you skip this step, you're going to stumble through your strategy. It will take longer. It will fall short and you're not going to achieve your outcomes. So you have to work on meeting people where they are, getting their self-awareness up a little bit, and then creating an environment where they can have a real dialogue as humans first and connect. And there's ways that you can do that are business focused, right? You can sort of do some warm up and then give them an actual problem to solve. This is going to be a real kind of golden nugget for your audience. One of the best ways to get a team to gel, if they're maybe not working too effectively yet, and maybe they're struggling a little bit with getting vulnerable, give them a common enemy. Give them a common problem to solve. GE was brilliant about this, decades ago in their workout process. Like put all the, have everybody just write on a Post-it note, what is the process that we do as a team that completely frustrates you, that we need to do, but it's like so ridiculously over-engineered, right? And put them into a pile and vote on the one that is the most annoying. And then work on that process, like literally break it down. Like, get into a room, whiteboard it, flip chart it. I don't really care. Do Post-it notes, write down every single ridiculous step that you do in that process that you need to keep the process, but the steps are infuriating your people, and have them solve that. Right?
That's a good idea.
When you give them a common enemy, they will come together because now they are sharing common ground that they didn't even know they had.
I love that. That's so good. Awesome. Well, I know we could go on and on, but we got to wrap up. I respect your time. So I always wrap up with 3 final questions and then anything that we didn't talk about that you just want to leave the listeners with. So first final question is, if someone is looking for their purpose, what is one sentence you would say that could help them find it?
Spend some time alone in the silence. That's the answers you will find more in the silence than in the busyness.
Good. I like it. Number 2, and you might have more than one, but what comes to mind? What's a favorite quote and why?
There was one that I just heard this morning, and now I'm going to get it wrong, but it just kind of stuck with me, and it's very timely. It said something to the effect of the middle class competes, but the world class collaborates. And I thought that was so telling, right? Because it is so true. And I won't go on because I know we're pressed for time, but I just absorb that quote and kind of model the world-class side of that and demonstrate that. And it's just going to work wonders.
That's so true. I love that one. Number 3, what's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
She played full out.
Love it. Very cool. All right. You run into someone in a coffee shop. They're like, hey, Claire, that was amazing. Like, we're working on a purpose. We're working on our connections. We're having this common enemy, all this stuff. What's something that we didn't touch on that you just think you want to leave our listeners with?
It's just to reinforce this notion that you are not alone. And I think, COVID kind of lulled us into the sense of, even though we're remote, we're in lockdown, we still have a way to connect through like video conferences and Facebook and everything else. And I think what it taught us as we emerged from it, we missed actual connections. And I think once you get back into the same room with people, you understand, I think, more keenly that we're not alone. At the core of the struggles that we have as human beings, whether we are a CEO or the janitor, is self-doubt, and that, that self-belief can sometimes thwart us. You're not alone. There is somebody in your life, in your circle, in your world who will listen to you.
So good. Not alone. Hey guys, this was great. I know you'll want to follow Claire. I'll have all of her links and information in the bios. Make sure to reach out. I know I can tell she's super approachable. You can reach out if you have any questions or want to book her for help within your organization or anything like that, of course. Let's go out there, guys. Let's change the world one starfish or one person at a time. We can change one life at a time. Together, we can change the world. Thanks so much for being on, Claire.
Thanks, Angela. It was great.